My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I was 42 years old when I discovered that my husband of 15 years had written me out of his will. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in my home office, a room Derek had insisted on designing with the finest mahogany desk and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking our 3-acre property. I remember running my fingers over the smooth, cool surface of that desk as I stared at the document I'd accidentally found while organizing our tax records. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but my face remained perfectly calm. A skill I'd mastered during my years as a corporate attorney before I gave it all up to support Derek's real estate development company. I had sacrificed my partnership track at one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. I had postponed having children when Derek insisted we needed to focus on building our empire first. I had poured my legal expertise, my connections, and my inheritance from my grandmother into his business, believing his promises that everything we build will be ours together. And there I sat, holding irrefutable proof that ours actually meant his family's. His parents, his siblings, even his cousins were named as beneficiaries, while I, his wife and partner, wasn't mentioned once. What Derek never understood about me was my patience and my ability to plan. That afternoon, as I slid his will back into the folder marked confidential, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. He thought he owned everything. I was about to prove him wrong. Derek and I met during our second year at Harvard Law School. I was at the top of our class, already being courted by the big firms, while Derek struggled to maintain a B average despite his charisma and networking skills. He was the type of person who lit up a room when he entered, strong jawline, confident stride, and an ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the world when he focused his attention on them. I was the quiet, analytical type who could dissect a legal argument with surgical precision, but froze in networking events. We were opposites, but it worked. I stayed up countless nights helping him prepare for exams, practically wrote his papers for him, and tutored him through complex legal concepts until they clicked. When he graduated with honors, his parents threw an extravagant party at their Beacon Hill home, where he publicly attributed his success to my brilliant Rebecca. On our wedding day, standing beneath an arch of white roses at his family's summer estate in the Hamptons, Derek looked into my eyes and promised, "Everything I build will be ours together, Becca. Every brick, every dollar, every success. It's for us and our future." I believed him completely. When he started his development company 2 years later, I didn't hesitate to give up my position on the partnership track at Morrison and Fletcher. The managing partner called me insane. I was only 2 years away from becoming the youngest female partner in the firm's history. But I saw it as investing in our shared future. We started in a small apartment in Cambridge, with me handling all the legal work for his first projects. As the business grew, so did our lifestyle, from the apartment to a townhouse, then to our current mansion in Wellesley with its 6 bedrooms and indoor pool. But even as our square footage expanded, I noticed Derek's family maintained a certain coldness toward me. His mother would introduce me as Derek's wife, rather than by my name, even after a decade of marriage. His father, a retired judge, would talk around me at family gatherings, directing questions about legal matters to Derek despite knowing my background. I tried everything to win them over, hosting perfect holiday gatherings, remembering every birthday and anniversary, even learning to make his mother's famous apple pie from her closely guarded recipe. Nothing seemed to bridge the gap of me being not from their social circle, as his sister Caroline once whispered to a cousin when she thought I couldn't hear. The first real indication of financial control came 5 years into our marriage, when Derek insisted on giving me an allowance instead of maintaining our joint accounts. "It's just easier for taxes this way, Becca," he explained, kissing my forehead like I was a child. "You don't need to worry about the complicated stuff." This from the man who'd needed me to explain the rule against perpetuities to him 6 times during law school. The day I found the will started like any other. I was organizing our tax documents for our accountant's quarterly review, a task Derek had always left to me since I was so much better with details. Our home office had 2 filing cabinets, one for business, one for personal. I needed our property tax records from the previous year and knew they'd be in the personal cabinet under real estate primary residence. When I pulled that folder, another one came with it, falling open on the floor. Bold letters stamped confidential in red across the cream-colored folder made my curiosity peak. I shouldn't have looked, but I'm glad I did. Inside was Derek's last will and testament, updated just 3 months prior. I still remember the exact phrasing. I, Derek James Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all my property, both real and personal, including but not limited to all real estate holdings, business interests in Thompson Development, Group and its subsidiaries, financial accounts, investments, vehicles, art collections, and personal effects to be divided as follows. What followed was a meticulous breakdown of percentages to his parents, 40%. His brother Michael, 25%, his sister Caroline, 25%, and the remaining 10% divided among 3 cousins who I'd met perhaps twice at family gatherings. My name appeared exactly once in the entire document, in the header identifying Derek as married to Rebecca Ann Thompson. The technical legal language made the exclusion deliberately clear, with a clause explicitly stating that the omission of his spouse was intentional and not due to oversight. My hands began to shake so badly that the papers made a rustling sound like autumn leaves. A wave of nausea hit me, and I had to put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. Once the initial shock subsided, memories flooded in. Derek, at our 10th anniversary dinner, raising a toast, to the woman who makes everything possible. I promise to take care of you forever, Becca. Derek, after his father's heart attack, holding my hand and whispering, life is so fragile. I need to make sure you're always protected if anything happens to me. Lies, all lies. I needed verification before I completely fell apart. With hands still trembling, I called James Burton, our family attorney, using the excuse that I wanted to update my own will to include a donation to my alma mater. While I have you on the phone, James, has Derek made any recent updates to his will that I should coordinate with? The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything before James awkwardly confirmed, yes, he made significant changes about 3 months ago. 3 months ago, right after our anniversary weekend in Napa Valley, where he'd surprised me with diamond earrings and told me I was the best decision he'd ever made. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I researched our state's marital property laws until 3 a.m., discovering that Massachusetts is not a community property state. Without proper legal protections I had neglected because I trusted my husband, I could be entitled to far less than half of what we'd built together. Further digging revealed something even more disturbing. Derek had been systematically structuring our assets through complex holding companies and trusts that would be difficult to untangle in divorce proceedings. The family business I had helped build was legally shielded from me. I wondered if my inability to have children was the reason. We'd tried for 3 years before medical tests revealed my infertility. Derek had seemed supportive at the time, but had he secretly held it against me? Was I just a temporary placeholder until he found someone who could give him heirs for the Thompson legacy? The more I thought about it, the more 15 years of small comments, glances, and family dynamics took on new, sinister meanings. I'd been a fool. For a week, I maintained the perfect wife facade while processing my emotions. Derek never noticed the difference. He was too absorbed in a new development project to see that my smiles no longer reached my eyes or that I'd stopped asking about his day. Every night after he fell asleep, I would slip out of bed and sit in the dark of our home office thinking. On the 7th night, I found myself staring at real estate listings at 2 a.m., not even sure why at first. Then it hit me. I needed to build something of my own, something he couldn't touch. The next day, I called Sarah Chen, my closest friend from law school who had become a financial advisor. Just a casual lunch to catch up, I told Derek when I marked it on our shared calendar. Over salmon salads at a restaurant far from Derek's usual haunts, I confided in Sarah. Her expression shifted from shock to determination as I spoke. First, we need to know what you're working with, she said, sliding into professional mode. I had $47,000 in a savings account Derek didn't know about. birthday checks from my parents I'd never deposited into our joint account, speaking fees, from legal conferences I'd attended over the years, and small inheritances from distant relatives. It wasn't much compared to his millions, but it was mine. Sarah helped me create an LLC under my maiden name, Campbell Properties, to shield my activities. "Real estate is perfect for you," she said. "You already understand the legal complexities, and there's serious money to be made in distressed properties, if you know what you're doing." I remembered the real estate finance class I'd taken in law school, the one where I'd earned the highest grade while Derek had barely passed. That night, I researched emerging neighborhoods in our metropolitan area, focusing on an up-and-coming district that was still affordable but showing signs of gentrification. Within 2 weeks, I had identified my first potential investment, a foreclosed duplex needing renovation. The bank wanted $120,000, but I knew from my research they'd take less. I combined my savings with a private loan from Sarah to make it happen. "I'll go in with you at 8% interest," she offered. "That's better than you'll get anywhere else with no credit history under your maiden name." While Derek was on a 3-day business trip to Chicago, I closed on the property for $98,500. I still remember signing my maiden name, Rebecca Ann Campbell, on the purchase documents, feeling a thrill of independence I hadn't experienced since before my marriage. I knew nothing about renovation, so I taught myself through online videos, forums, and books. I discovered I had a knack for seeing a property's potential beneath peeling paint and outdated fixtures. Finding contractors willing to work with a woman proved challenging at first. I endured mansplaining, inflated quotes, and patronizing attitudes. Eventually, I found a crew led by a contractor named Miguel who respected my vision and my budget. To explain my frequent absences to Derek, I created elaborate cover stories about volunteer work and fitness classes. "I've joined this amazing women's empowerment organization," I told him over dinner one night. He nodded absently, more focused on his phone than my words. "That's nice, honey. You should have hobbies." 4 months later, with the duplex renovated and both units rented at above-market rates, I had my first taste of positive cash flow. $200 a month that went straight into Campbell Properties' business account. It wasn't much compared to what Derek made, but it was entirely mine, and he had no idea it existed. My first success with the duplex gave me both confidence and capital. After 6 months of steady rental income, I refinanced the property based on its new appraised value and pulled out enough equity to make a down payment on a small 4-unit apartment building 3 miles away. Around the same time, Derek casually mentioned over breakfast that he'd invested $200,000 in his brother Michael's tech startup. "It's going to be huge," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Michael's team has this revolutionary algorithm." What struck me wasn't the investment itself, but that he hadn't consulted me before making it. More evidence of his separate vision of our finances. When I suggested we should discuss our retirement planning together, Derek waved his hand dismissively. "I'll handle it, Becca. That's what I do." At an estate auction the following month, I met Maria Rodriguez, a seasoned real estate investor who took an interest in my careful property analysis. "You've got good instincts," she told me after watching me walk through a property, pointing out issues the listing had conveniently omitted. Maria became both mentor and friend, teaching me strategies that weren't in any online course. Meanwhile, at a Thompson family dinner, Derek's sister Caroline made a pointed comment that sent chills down my spine. "It's so important that family assets stay in the family. Don't you think, Rebecca?" The look she gave me made it clear what, or rather who, wasn't considered family. With Maria's guidance, I began to shift my strategy toward commercial properties, starting with a small retail space that I renovated and leased to a local artisan bakery at a healthy profit. At a dinner party with Derek's business associates, I casually mentioned a potential opportunity zone in the western part of the city. Derek immediately presented it as his own insight to his colleagues without acknowledging my contribution. "I've been watching that area for months," he said, as I sipped my wine in silence. My growing real estate activities became increasingly difficult to conceal. One night during our anniversary dinner, a contractor called about an emergency plumbing issue at the apartment building. I excused myself to the restroom to take the call, heart pounding as I whispered instructions while checking under bathroom stalls to ensure I was alone. With each property acquisition, my confidence grew alongside my knowledge. My portfolio hit six figures while Derek remained completely oblivious, too self-absorbed to question why his formerly career-focused wife seemed content with charity work and yoga classes. I started volunteering at a women's shelter one afternoon a week, partly as cover, but also because it gave me perspective. Many of the women there had fled financial abuse, and their stories reinforced my determination to establish independence. Through Maria, I connected with a network of female investors who supported each other with advice, referrals, and occasionally co-investment opportunities. When I suggested to Derek that we put my name on the deed to our recently purchased vacation home in Cape Cod, he laughed and said, "The paperwork is such a hassle, and it doesn't really matter anyway since we're married." But it did matter, as I now knew all too well. 2 years into my secret venture, I focused on portfolio diversification, adding a small warehouse, more residential units in various neighborhoods, and even a partial interest in a strip mall through a syndication deal Maria organized. I created increasingly complex legal structures to protect my growing assets. Multiple LLCs, a trust, and carefully documented separate property agreements that would stand up to scrutiny if ever challenged. Derek began questioning my new friendships, particularly my relationship with those real estate women, as he called Maria and my investor network. "You spend a lot of time with them," he observed over dinner one evening, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "What do you all talk about for so many hours?" I shrugged and said, "Oh, just normal stuff. Kids, travel, community projects." The lie came easily now. While organizing our safe deposit box for our annual insurance review, I discovered Derek had a second box at the same bank that I knew nothing about. The bank associate mentioned it casually. "Will you be reviewing box 247 as well, Mrs. Thompson?" When I asked Derek about it later, he dismissed my question with practiced ease. "Just some old family documents my father asked me to keep." Nothing. Interesting. The day my portfolio value reached $500,000 was the same day Derek laughed at me when I tried to discuss real estate market trends at dinner. "Honey, these are complicated economic factors," he said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Stick to your charity work. You're so good at that." I nodded and smiled while mentally calculating the cap rate on the commercial property I was scheduled to close on the following week. I received an invitation to speak at a female investors conference about creative financing strategies, an honor that I had to decline to maintain my secret. The hardest part was not sharing my accomplishments with anyone except Sarah and Maria. When a major tenant threatened to leave my retail space unless I reduced their rent, I negotiated a creative solution involving a percentage-based rent tied to their sales performance. A win-win that actually increased my income when their business subsequently boomed. Derek forgot our anniversary entirely that year, sending a generic text at 9 p.m. with, "Sorry, swamped with the Riverside project. We'll make it up to you this weekend." I spent that anniversary day closing on my largest acquisition yet, a 12-unit apartment building with value-add potential that I purchased 20% below market value. During a weekend meditation retreat, which was real, though primarily serving as cover for my absence, I experienced a moment of profound self-doubt. Was I becoming just as deceitful as Derek? But then I remembered the will, the separate safety deposit box, and years of financial exclusion, and my resolve strengthened. The emotional distance in our marriage grew in proportion to my rising confidence. Derek worked increasingly long hours and often came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, which he attributed to meeting clients. I established solid relationships with several regional banks as my credit profile under my maiden name grew stronger. One afternoon, I experienced a terrifying close call when I literally ran into Derek's colleague James while showing a potential tenant through my retail property. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" he asked, clearly confused. "Oh, just helping out a friend who owns this building," I explained smoothly. "She's out of town and asked me to meet with some prospects." James looked doubtful but didn't press further. That night, I lay awake wondering how much longer I could maintain my double life and whether I even wanted to. 3 years into my secret real estate career, disaster struck when a major water main break flooded the basement and first floor of my apartment complex, causing extensive damage. Insurance would cover most of it, but I needed $30,000 immediately for emergency repairs before the claims process could be completed. With Derek scrutinizing our joint accounts for his new hotel development project, I couldn't risk withdrawing such a large sum. Instead, I leveraged my network, securing short-term loans from 3 fellow investors who trusted my track record. Miguel and his crew worked around the clock to mitigate the damage, and I spent several nights sleeping only 3 hours, taking calls from displaced tenants while maintaining my perfect wife persona during the day. The crisis ultimately strengthened my business as I implemented better property management systems and emergency protocols. Shortly after resolving the flood situation, my portfolio crossed the $1 million valuation mark. I was officially a millionaire in secret. I celebrated alone in my car, parked overlooking the city skyline, with a single cupcake and a profound sense of pride mixed with loneliness. 2 weeks later, Derek collapsed at work from what turned out to be extreme exhaustion and dangerously high blood pressure, requiring a 3-day hospital stay. Sitting beside his bed, watching him sleep with monitors beeping around us, I briefly reconsidered my plan. Was I being too harsh, too calculating? But when he recovered, nothing changed. In fact, his first week back at work, he implemented new measures to track my spending and questioned a $200 donation I'd made to a women's business initiative. An unexpected opportunity arose when I learned about a foreclosed small office building near the University District, available at 40% below market value due to the previous owner's tax problems. The property required all my available liquid capital plus a significant bank loan, a calculated risk that would either accelerate my portfolio growth or create dangerous cash flow problems if it failed. I spent 2 weeks analyzing every aspect of the investment, creating detailed projections and contingency plans. "You seem distracted," Derek commented one evening. "Is your women's group planning another fundraiser?" I smiled and nodded while mentally reviewing tenant improvement allowance calculations. The risk paid off spectacularly when I secured 3 professional tenants, a law firm, an accounting practice, and a tech startup within 60 days. All signing 5-year leases at premium rates. The property immediately became the cornerstone of my portfolio, generating substantial positive cash flow. That same month, Derek announced he had invested our joint savings in a new resort development venture without consulting me. "It's going to double our money in 18 months, he said excitedly over dinner. I nodded supportively while wondering how I would have reacted years ago, before I had my own financial security. Using a portion of my growing proceeds, I anonymously established a small scholarship program for women pursuing real estate education, named after my grandmother, who had always encouraged my independence. Meanwhile, I focused on learning advanced tax strategies to maximize my portfolio efficiency, often staying up late studying IRS codes and regulations after Derek went to bed. Over time, I developed a renovation formula that consistently increased property values well above the invested capital, creating a reputation among local brokers who began bringing off-market deals directly to Ms. Campbell. I received an unexpected call from a regional development company interested in partnering on larger projects. "Your portfolio performance has caught our attention," the development director said. I regretfully declined, knowing such a partnership would be impossible to hide. Later that week, while searching for our insurance documents, I accidentally discovered statements for an account I didn't recognize. Derek had been hiding significant bonuses in a separate account for over 2 years. In our 15th year of marriage, I began noticing subtle changes in Derek's appearance and behavior. New designer clothes, a gym membership he actually used, late-night texts that he shielded from my view, and a sudden interest in his skincare routine. I might have been wrapped up in my real estate empire, but I wasn't blind. The confirmation came in the form of a receipt from Tiffany & Co. for a platinum bracelet that never made its way to my jewelry box. Still, I needed certainty before making any decisions. After careful consideration, I hired a private investigator, a woman recommended through a divorce attorney in my real estate network. "Just be prepared for what I might find," she warned during our discreet meeting at a cafe 30 miles from our home. 2 weeks later, she delivered a folder containing photos, hotel receipts, and restaurant bills documenting Derek's 6-month affair with Megan, a 28-year-old financial analyst at his firm. The most painful discovery wasn't the affair itself, but learning he'd taken her to our favorite restaurant in Provincetown, the place where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. Even worse, he'd used our joint account to fund jewelry, weekend getaways, and even a down payment on a luxury condo where they met twice weekly. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. After the investigator left, I sat in my car for hours, finally allowing myself to break down completely. The tears came in violent waves as 15 years of suppressed hurt, betrayal, and rage poured out. A security guard eventually knocked on my window, concerned by the sobbing. Woman in the parking garage. I pulled myself together enough to drive to Sarah's house, where I spent the night curled up in her guest room. The next morning, I called a therapist specializing in infidelity trauma and booked an emergency session. The therapy became my lifeline. Over the following weeks, as I processed not only Derek's betrayal, but also my own years of secrecy. The difference, my therapist pointed out, is that your actions were protective, not destructive to the relationship. You didn't take vows to financially merge with your husband. He, however, explicitly vowed fidelity. As I worked through my emotional turmoil, a market downturn threatened portions of my portfolio, particularly my retail properties as consumer spending declined. I spent many late nights developing creative refinancing strategies to protect my assets during the economic uncertainty. Sarah warned me about rumors that Derek's company was facing potential SEC scrutiny over accounting irregularities in their recent projects. Be careful, Rebecca. If there's an investigation, your assets could be at risk by association, even though they're separate. Derek's behavior grew increasingly erratic. One evening, he suddenly asked about my personal savings. Do you still have that account from before we were married? How much is in there now? When I deflected, he pressed harder. We should pool our resources. I have some temporary cash flow issues with the new development. I consulted with a divorcee attorney to understand my options, learning that my carefully structured separate property would likely be protected in a divorce, but that timing and documentation would be crucial. I stabilized my portfolio through strategic management during the downturn, cutting unnecessary expenses, negotiating with lenders, and even selling one underperforming property to shore up cash reserves. While other investors panicked and sold at losses, I selectively acquired new properties at discounted prices, following the old adage of buying when others were selling. Derek's business problems became increasingly apparent as he began bringing work stress home, snapping at small issues, and making bitter comments about fair-weather investors. He started asking more pointed questions about my activities and where all your time goes, making me realize that my window for action was narrowing. One night, after he'd been drinking, he admitted his company was facing some temporary setbacks and suggested I ask my parents for a loan. I maintained my supportive wife role while accelerating my preparations for what I now saw as an inevitable confrontation. The facade finally collapsed on a rainy Tuesday when the Boston Business Journal published an expose on financial irregularities at Thompson Development Group, sending Derek's company stock plummeting 60% in a single day. I was preparing dinner when Derek stormed into the house, soaking wet and wild-eyed. "It's a hit job," he shouted, throwing his keys across the kitchen. "They've been out to get me for years." I listened quietly as he ranted about jealous competitors and disloyal employees, all while checking his phone obsessively as messages poured in. The next morning, creditors began freezing company accounts, and investors demanded emergency meetings. Derek's carefully constructed business empire was unraveling rapidly. After 3 days of watching him spiral between rage and panic, he approached me with what he clearly thought was a reasonable request. "Becca, I need you to liquidate your retirement account," he said, attempting to sound calm, though I could see the desperation in his eyes. "Just temporarily. I can replace it in 6 months with interest." I asked how much he needed. "All of it," he replied without hesitation. "About 400,000, right?" The amount was laughable compared to what I actually controlled, but He had no way of knowing that? Let me think about it, I replied, knowing the moment of truth was approaching. That evening, I prepared myself mentally and emotionally for what would come next. I chose my outfit carefully, the charcoal gray suit I'd worn as a corporate attorney, not the softer, feminine clothes I'd adopted during my years as Derek's wife. When he returned home, I was waiting in his home office, sitting behind his desk with a glass of his expensive scotch. "We need to talk," I said as he entered. The confrontation began calmly enough. I slid a copy of his will across the desk. Not the original I'd found, but a legally obtained copy from our attorney's office. "Would you like to explain this?" Derek's shock quickly turned to defensive anger. "You had no right to go through my private papers," he snapped, avoiding the actual question. "How I structure my estate is my business." I remained perfectly composed, the way I used to before cross-examining a hostile witness. "Is that so? After 15 years of marriage, after I gave up my career to help build your company, after I've supported you through everything, your business remains solely your business?" Derek's justifications came in predictable waves. First claiming it was just a draft, then suggesting his family legacy needed protection, finally admitting he'd never updated it after we married. "My parents are traditional, Becca. They insisted on certain provisions." When those excuses gained no traction, he pivoted to manipulation. "I never thought it would matter because I plan to live a long life with you. Don't you trust me?" When I remained unmoved, his anger resurfaced. "What does it matter anyway? Everything I have will be gone after this mess. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" That's when I revealed the first card in my hand. "Actually, Derek, not everything will be gone. I've built something of my own while you were busy excluding me from our supposed partnership." I opened my laptop and pulled up my portfolio summary, showing only about 30% of my actual holdings, but enough to shock him into silence. "What is this? Campbell Properties? Your maiden name? How long have you been hiding this?" His face contorted, with the special outrage of a controlling man discovering he hasn't been in control after all. When he regained his composure, he attempted to claim rights to my properties. "This is marital property. Half of it belongs to me regardless of what name you put on the paperwork." I was prepared for this. I presented him with the meticulously maintained legal documentation that protected my assets. The LLC formation predating any property purchases, the loans in my name only, the separate bank accounts never commingled with marital funds, and most importantly, the source of initial capital coming solely from my premarital savings and inheritances. His face fell as the reality set in. "You've been planning this for years. While I trusted you, you were undermining me." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. Derek cycled through threats. "I'll ruin you in court," pleading, "We can fix this together like we've always done," and even attempted reconciliation. "I never meant to hurt you." I let him exhaust all avenues before delivering my terms. "Here's what's going to happen, Derek. We're getting divorced. I'll agree to a clean, quick separation that won't attract further attention to your business problems. I'll even sign NDAs about what I know regarding your company's practices. In exchange, you'll agree to my proposed settlement without contest." I slid another document across the desk, a separation agreement my attorney had prepared. Finally, after years of suppressed emotions, I spoke my truth. "You never saw me as a partner, Derek. I was an accessory, a useful tool for your ambitions, but never your equal. You excluded me from financial decisions while benefiting from my expertise. You hid assets while I helped build your company. You wrote me out of your will while telling me you'd always take care of me. And finally, you betrayed our vows while I remained faithful despite everything. I deserved better. And now I've built it for myself." I stood, gathered my papers, and walked toward the door. "I've moved my things to my own place. My attorney will contact yours tomorrow. Goodbye, Derek." As I left the house we'd shared for a decade, I felt a profound sense of both grief and liberation. I drove directly to my recently purchased luxury condo in a secure building downtown, a property Derek had never seen and would never enter. The divorce proceedings moved surprisingly quickly. Derek's family attempted to contest the settlement, terrified at the prospect of an outsider walking away with any Thompson assets. Their shock at discovering my financial acumen provided a small but satisfying vindication after years of their thinly veiled contempt. Derek's company eventually filed for bankruptcy protection, but my careful legal separation of our assets before the public downfall protected my holdings. Throughout the economic challenges that affected the broader market, my diversified portfolio continued to grow, slower than during the boom years, but steadily and sustainably. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. I continued therapy sessions, joined support groups for divorced women, and gradually rebuilt the non-financial aspects of my life that had withered during my marriage. I reconnected with old friends from law school and my brief legal career, many of whom expressed both sympathy for my situation and admiration for my resilience. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was expanding my anonymous scholarship into a proper foundation, providing both funding and mentorship to women seeking financial independence after leaving difficult relationships. I named it Phoenix Foundation, a nod to rising from the ashes of my marriage, but also vague enough to protect my privacy. My personal experience had shown me how financial dependency creates vulnerability, and I was determined to help others avoid that trap. For the first year post-divorce, I focused primarily on stabilizing my business interests and emotional health. I sold properties that required too much active management and reinvested in more passive options like triple net retail and office buildings with stable, long-term tenants. This shift gave me time to rediscover my own interests and passions. Beyond just financial security and independence, I took up painting again, a hobby abandoned in college, and started traveling solo to places Derek had never been interested in visiting. Along the way, I developed a philosophy about forgiveness that surprised those who knew my story. Forgiveness isn't about absolving wrongs, I would explain, when asked how I could seem so at peace. It's about releasing the anger so it doesn't consume you. Derek will always be responsible for his choices, but I choose not to let those choices define my future. 3 years after our divorce, I unexpectedly encountered Derek at a charity gala in Boston. He had aged noticeably, stress lines around his eyes, gray hair at his temples. He was there with his parents, their influence apparently having sustained him through his business collapse. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment I braced for the rush of anger or hurt I would have expected. Instead, I felt nothing but a calm recognition of a person from my past who no longer held any power over my emotions. I nodded politely and turned back to my conversation, leaving him to wonder at my transformation. In time, I developed new relationships based on transparency and equality. I was upfront about my financial situation with potential partners, not flaunting my success, but making it clear I valued honesty above all else. Some men were intimidated, others intrigued, for the wrong reasons, but eventually I found connections with people who appreciated my journey and shared similar values. The real fortune I built wasn't measured in property values or portfolio returns. It was the unshakable confidence that came from creating security on my own terms. No one could ever again make me feel small, dependent, or unworthy of full partnership. What began as a desperate act of self-preservation evolved into genuine empowerment that extended beyond me to the women I now mentored through the foundation. In a surprising turn of events, I eventually returned to practicing law part-time, specializing in helping women understand their financial rights in marriage and divorce. My story, shared carefully and selectively, gave clients hope that they too could rebuild after betrayal. As for what comes next, I remain open to life's possibilities while standing firmly on the foundation I've built. To me, family legacy isn't about bloodlines or inherited wealth. It's about the values we choose to embody and the positive impact we leave on others. Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads where you had to choose between security and self-respect? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful transformations. If my journey resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power and build something meaningful for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. May you Always know your worth and have the courage to create the life you deserve. I stood in front of the gleaming glass facade of Axion Technologies, clutching my offer letter so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The words regional director seemed to pulse with a surreal energy, almost as if they might vanish if I looked away. My name, Sarah Mitchell, printed in bold at the top of the letter, felt like someone else's identity I was borrowing for the day. 4 years ago, I'd been standing behind a grocery store register, my business degree gathering dust, while my then-boyfriend Jason smirked at my uniform and name tag. "Just a temporary setback," I'd told him, forcing a smile as I bagged organic, produced for tech executives who never quite made eye contact. "It won't be forever." Jason had laughed, straightening his expensive tie before kissing me on the cheek with something that felt like pity. "Sure, babe. Whatever you need to tell yourself. Some people are meant to climb the ladder, and some people are meant to stay on the ground floor. Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues." The memory still burned, but now it fueled something different in me as I stared up at the 20th floor where I knew his department was located. Jason had no idea I was starting today. No idea that the new regional director his boss had been raving about for weeks was the same woman he told was nothing without him during our final devastating argument. The same woman who'd sobbed in her car afterward, mascara tracking down her cheeks, wondering if he was right. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. In 30 minutes, I'd be sitting in the executive boardroom, being introduced to the team I'd be overseeing, including Jason, now a mid-level department manager who'd been passed over twice for the position I'd just been handed. I adjusted my blazer, checked my reflection in my phone camera one last time, and took a deep breath that seemed to pull in all my past selves. The struggling student, the heartbroken girlfriend, the determined retail manager, the focused MBA graduate. We had all arrived at this moment together. With one final glance at the offer letter, my golden ticket, my vindication, I pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the cool, marble-floored lobby of my new kingdom. The universe doesn't give us justice. We have to create it for ourselves, one painful step at a time. Jason and I met during our junior year in Professor Harrington's advanced marketing strategy class at State University. We were both business majors with big dreams of corner offices and company credit cards, though our paths to that shared classroom couldn't have been more different. I was a first-generation college student, the daughter of a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse to make ends meet. Education was my ticket out, my obsession, my only option. I juggled 3 part-time jobs, morning shifts at the campus coffee shop, weekend receptionist at a law firm, and nights tutoring freshmen in accounting fundamentals. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, but neither was failure. Jason Rodriguez came from a different world entirely. Private schools, family vacations to Europe, and a father who was VP at a financial services firm with a name that appeared on buildings. He drove a car that cost more than my entire education, and spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had never worried whether there would be enough money for groceries at the end of the month. What drew me to him initially was the way he commanded attention in class discussions. Articulate, insightful, with the kind of charisma that made even professors pause to listen. What drew him to me, he said, was my refreshing determination and hungry intelligence, words that felt like compliments at the time, but later took on a different meaning. Our first date was coffee that turned into lunch that turned into dinner. He listened intently as I outlined my 5-year plan to graduate, secure a marketing position, and eventually specialize in digital strategy development. When he talked about his own ambitions to follow his father into the financial sector but make his own name, I admired his desire for independence. By senior year, we were inseparable, studying together in the library until closing, debating business ethics over cheap wine in my cramped apartment, making plans for the shared future that seemed inevitable. We graduated in May during the worst economic downturn in decades. Jason, with his family connections and polished resume, landed an entry-level analyst position at Axion Technologies within 2 weeks. I sent out 87 applications in the first month and received 82 automated rejections. The remaining 5 never responded. The first tiny crack in our relationship appeared when Jason missed my birthday dinner. The one luxury I'd allowed myself after weeks of increasingly desperate job hunting. He texted an hour after the reservation to say he'd been invited to drinks with the executive team and couldn't pass up the networking opportunity. I sat alone at the restaurant table, picking at a meal I couldn't afford. Telling myself this was part of supporting each other's dreams. When a grocery store near my apartment put up a hiring sign, I swallowed my pride and filled out an application. The store manager took one look at my business degree and raised his eyebrows. "You're overqualified," he said, "but I need someone reliable." I started the following Monday, arranging my shifts to leave mornings free for interviews that rarely materialized. Jason tried to be supportive when I told him, but I caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or the first seeds of the condescension that would later bloom between us. "It's temporary," he assured me, in the tone of someone reassuring themselves. "Everyone hits speed bumps. The important thing is you're working." I clung to that perspective through long days of scanning items, making small talk with customers, and massaging feeling back into my feet each night. I still believed we were in this together. His success would eventually become our success. I just needed to hold on until my real career could begin. The belief sustained me through those early months, even as Jason's world began to expand while mine seemed to shrink around the rhythmic beep of the scanner and the fluorescent lights of the checkout lane. The subtle shift in Jason's attitude toward my job began so gradually, I almost didn't notice it happening. What started as gentle teasing about my uniform or jokes about my name tag slowly transformed into something sharper, more pointed. "How was your day counting other people's money?" he'd ask while loosening his tie after coming home from stakeholder meetings. I'd force a laugh and change the subject, not wanting to admit how those casual comments stung. I was working double shifts whenever possible, often standing for 12 hours straight with only a 30-minute break, my back aching and my customer service smile frozen in place. Every spare moment was spent revising my resume, sending applications, and following up on leads that invariably led nowhere in the still recovering economy. The first time Jason's disrespect became unmistakable was at a dinner with his new coworkers at an upscale restaurant I could only afford because he'd offered to pay. When introductions went around the table, I waited for Jason to mention my business degree or marketing aspirations. Instead, he squeezed my shoulder and said, "This is Sarah. She's just a cashier right now," before laughing and quickly steering the conversation toward a project his team was developing. The table moved on, but something inside me went still and cold. In the taxi ride home, I confronted him about it. "Would it have killed you to mention I have the same degree as everyone at that table? That being a cashier isn't my career goal?" Jason looked genuinely puzzled. "Why are you being so sensitive? I said right now. Obviously it's temporary. Would you have preferred I made something up to impress people we'll probably never see again?" His explanation sounded reasonable enough that I questioned whether I was overreacting, a pattern that would repeat itself countless times in the months ahead. Our date nights became increasingly subject to last-minute cancellations for can't miss networking opportunities. My birthday dinner had been just the beginning. Our anniversary dinner was preempted by an impromptu department happy hour, and the concert tickets I'd saved for 3 months to buy went unused when a senior manager invited Jason to a golf outing. Each time I told myself that sacrifices were necessary for long-term success, that I would do the same in his position. But each rejection added to a growing pile of evidence that I was becoming less of a priority. The job rejections continued to accumulate as well, each one chipping away at my confidence. "Maybe I should go back for a master's," I suggested one night over the cheap pasta dinner I'd made. "Not everyone with our degree is struggling like this. Maybe there's something wrong with how I'm presenting myself." Jason looked up from his phone where he'd been answering work emails throughout the meal. "Maybe," he said with a shrug. "Or maybe you're just not aggressive enough. Business is about confidence, Sarah. If you act like you belong in the bargain bin, that's where people will put you." I stayed up that night rewriting my cover letter, trying to infuse it with the confidence that seemed to come so naturally to Jason. For his birthday, I organized a surprise party, inviting his coworkers, and spending weeks coordinating details during my breaks. Jason showed up 3 hours late, already half drunk from an unplanned happy hour, barely acknowledging the effort before pulling me into conversations with colleagues where I stood silently nodding, unable to contribute to discussions about projects and people I knew nothing about. The incident that truly opened my eyes happened when Jason mentioned casually over breakfast that he was leaving for a weekend trip with work friends to a lakeside cabin. "When were you going to tell me about this?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Jason looked genuinely confused. "I didn't think you'd be interested. It's just going to be shop talk and networking." When I pointed out that significant others had been invited, he had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I just assumed you'd be working this weekend." He was right. I was scheduled for both Saturday and Sunday, but the assumption stung worse than the exclusion. It was becoming clear that in Jason's mind, our lives were diverging rather than converging, and he was perfectly comfortable with that trajectory. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long time, trying to recognize the ambitious, confident woman I'd been in college. She seemed to be fading, replaced by someone who apologized too much and expected too little. I promised her I wouldn't let her disappear completely. Jason's promotion to team lead after just 18 months at Axion became a turning point in our relationship. The modest salary bump transformed his wardrobe overnight: custom shirts, designer watches, and shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. But the more significant change was in how he spoke to me, a new edge of superiority that cut deeper with each passing week. "Team leadership is really about vision," he explained over dinner, barely glancing up as I placed his favorite meal on the table. "Being able to see potential where others can't. Not everyone has that gift." The implied comparison hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. When I finally landed an administrative assistant position at a small marketing firm called Riverside Media, I was ecstatic. After 14 months of scanning groceries and facing rejection, I would finally be working in a professional environment, even if the role was entry-level. I rushed home to tell Jason, imagining his pride and relief that my career had finally gained traction. Instead, he glanced up from his laptop with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Glorified secretary work, huh? Well, I guess someone has to answer the phones. What's the salary like?" When I told him, his eyebrows raised. "That's it? You'd make more managing the grocery store." He turned back to his spreadsheet, the conversation clearly over in his mind. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my excitement curdling into something bitter and heavy. The following weekend, we went apartment hunting. Our lease was ending, and Jason insisted we needed to move to Westbrook, an upscale neighborhood filled with young professionals and artisanal coffee shops. "This is where the connections happen," he insisted as we toured a sleek one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop pool. Morning runs, dog walking, elevator conversations, networking doesn't end at 5 o'clock. The rent was nearly double what we currently paid, and when I pointed out that even splitting it would strain my new salary to the breaking point, Jason frowned. "Maybe you should be more concerned about advancing your career than pinching pennies. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, Sarah." We signed the lease the following day, with Jason agreeing to pay 60% to my 40%, a split that still left me eating ramen for lunch most days while he ordered delivery from trendy restaurants. Money became a constant source of tension. Between us, Jason began suggesting expensive restaurants and weekend getaways with his coworkers and their partners, outings that stretched my budget to the breaking point. When I suggested more affordable alternatives, he would sigh dramatically. "This is about building relationships, Sarah. Do you think executives get ahead by watching their pennies and staying home?" I started declining some invitations, citing work commitments, only to discover through social media that Jason went anyway, smiling in photos with colleagues whose partners stood where I should have been. Then came the business trips, conferences, and client meetings that grew more frequent as Jason climbed the corporate ladder. I supported him fully until the night I borrowed his laptop to check my email and a notification popped up from a friend. "Epic weekend in Vegas. Same suite next year?" I clicked through to find photos of Jason with friends at a pool party. During a weekend, he'd told me he was at a financial technology conference in Phoenix. When confronted, he dismissed my concerns with practiced ease. It was last minute. The guys wanted to blow off steam after the conference sessions wrapped early. Why are you making such a big deal about this? His lies should have been a red flag, but by then, I'd grown accustomed to doubting my own reactions, rather than questioning. His behavior, the holiday dinner with his family, crystallized everything that had been slowly poisoning our relationship. Seated around his parents' polished dining table, Jason regaled everyone with stories of his latest project successes and name-dropped executives he'd impressed. When his mother politely asked about my work, I began to describe a marketing initiative I'd been helping coordinate at Riverside. Jason interrupted mid-sentence. "Mom, you don't want to hear about administrative stuff. Trust me." He launched into another story about his department's record-breaking quarter while I pushed food around my plate, rendered invisible by his casual dismissal. On the drive home, when I tried to explain how humiliated I felt, Jason seemed genuinely perplexed. "I was saving you from boring them. Nobody wants to hear about filing systems and phone protocols, Sarah." The worst part wasn't his dismissal. It was that I was beginning to believe him. My world had gradually contracted to accommodate his expanding ego. I stopped sharing work stories, then stopped sharing much at all. I declined invitations from the few college friends I'd maintained relationships with, embarrassed by the growing disparity between their burgeoning careers and my stalled one. I stopped correcting Jason when he introduced me without mentioning my job at all. Like a frog in slowly heating water, I didn't realize how dangerous my situation had become until I was already beginning to boil. After 18 months at Riverside Media, I spotted a job posting that made my heart race. A management training program at Value Mart, a national retail chain known for promoting from within. The intensive one-year program promised rotations through every department, culminating in an assistant manager position with clear pathways to store management and beyond. The requirements matched my experience perfectly: administrative skills, customer service background, and a business degree. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of genuine hope as I carefully crafted my application, even requesting a recommendation from my supervisor who enthusiastically agreed. When the call came inviting me for an interview, I spent hours preparing responses and assembling a portfolio showcasing relevant projects from my administrative role. The interview went brilliantly. 3 hours of in-depth discussion about retail strategy, employee development, and operational efficiency. Driving home, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I was building something meaningful, something that belonged to me. Jason was working late, so I prepared his favorite meal and opened a bottle of wine to celebrate what felt like a turning point. When he finally arrived home, loosening his tie and dropping his keys in the bowl by the door, I could barely contain my excitement. "I have amazing news," I blurted, pouring him a glass of wine. "I interviewed for a management training program today, and they practically offered me the position on the spot." Jason took a long sip before responding, his expression unreadable. "Retail management? That's your big career move?" The excitement that had been bubbling inside me all day instantly deflated. "It's a structured program with guaranteed advancement," I explained, hearing the defensive note in my voice. "The director said they're expanding their corporate team, and specifically looking to promote program graduates into regional positions." Jason's laugh held no warmth. "So you're going from ringing up groceries to ringing up clothing? Lateral moves won't get you to the top, Sarah. You need to think bigger." I felt my cheeks burning. "They start trainees at 15% more than I'm making now, with bonuses and full benefits." I didn't add that it would be more than enough for me to afford my share of our rent without struggling. Jason shrugged, already scrolling through his phone. "Sounds like you've made up your mind. Just don't expect me to get excited about you counting inventory and making employee schedules." The following week, I received and accepted the formal offer. Jason's dismissal of my achievement hurt, but I was determined to prove the value of this opportunity to him and to myself. What I didn't anticipate was how threatened he would feel by my newfound enthusiasm. Each morning as I prepared for training, absorbing operations manuals and retail strategy guides, he would make subtle digs about retail drones and corporate conformity. When I shared insights from my training sessions, he would check his watch or change the subject. His behavior reached a breaking point during a dinner party he insisted on hosting for his department colleagues. I'd spent the entire day cleaning our apartment and preparing an elaborate meal while also completing training assignments. As we sat around the dining table, one of Jason's coworkers politely asked about my work. Before I could answer, Jason interjected with exaggerated patience. "Sarah's in retail now. She's learning how to manage a store." The way he emphasized store made it sound like I'd chosen to manage a trash dump. When his colleague expressed genuine interest in ValueMart's business model, Jason cut the conversation short. "Trust me, corporate strategy at a big box store isn't exactly revolutionary. More wine, anyone?" Later, as the evening wound down and guests were preparing to leave, I overheard Jason in the kitchen with two colleagues. "Career advancement isn't for everyone," he was saying, his voice slightly slurred from wine. "Some people need structure, clear boundaries. Not everyone's cut out for the ambiguity of true executive work." Then came the words that would permanently alter the course of our relationship. "Let's be honest, she's nothing without me in this city. I'm the one with the connections, the one opening doors. She'd be stocking shelves somewhere without me." The silence that followed suggested even his colleagues were uncomfortable with this assessment. I stepped back from the doorway, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. When the last guest had left, I confronted him, my voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "Is that really what you think of me? That I'm nothing without you?" Jason looked momentarily startled, then his expression shifted to something between pity and contempt. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah. I was making conversation. By telling your colleagues I'd be nowhere without you, that I'm basically a charity case you've taken on? Look," he sighed, loosening his tie. "You're taking this personally when it's just an objective assessment. Who got you the interview at Riverside? My connection with their HR director. Who introduced you to half the people in your contact list? Me. This isn't about feelings. It's about facts." I stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. "You actually believe that, don't you? That everything good in my life comes from you?" "Not everything," he conceded with magnanimous insincerity. "Just the important parts, the parts that matter professionally in this city." I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, which had been breaking slowly for years, but something more fundamental. The illusion that we were partners, that we wanted the best for each other, that love meant supporting each other's dreams rather than ranking them. "I need to leave," I said quietly. Jason rolled his eyes. "It's late and you're upset. We can talk about this in the morning when you're being reasonable." "No," I said, my voice steadying. "I need to leave you. This relationship. I can't do this anymore." For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely surprised. "Because of one comment at a dinner party? Come on, Sarah, don't be ridiculous." "It's not one comment. It's years of comments. Years of you slowly convincing me I'm less than I am. Less capable, less worthy, less important." Tears streamed down my face, but my voice remained steady. "And the worst part is, I started to believe you." Jason's expression hardened. "Maybe because it's true. Maybe deep down you know exactly what your prospects are without me in your corner." In that moment, something crystallized within me, a question that would change everything. Is this really who I am? Is this what I deserve? The answer came with unexpected clarity. No, this wasn't who I was meant to be. This diminished, doubtful version of myself was a creation of his making, not my true identity. Without another word, I walked to our bedroom and pulled out my suitcase, the one I'd used for business trips that never materialized, dreams that had been deferred but never truly abandoned. Jason followed, leaning against the doorframe with arms crossed as I methodically packed clothing, toiletries, important documents. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" he asked, his tone suggesting I was being childish. "Away from you," I replied simply, and toward myself. The tiny studio apartment I found in East Side wasn't much, a converted storage space above a laundromat with pipes that groaned and windows that rattled when the trains passed. But it was mine, paid for with my own money, free from the weight of Jason's expectations and judgments. The first few weeks were a blur of emotional extremes. Bone-deep exhaustion as I threw myself into the management training program by day and sobbed into my pillow by night. Moments of terrifying doubt when Jason's voice would echo in my head, telling me I'd never succeed without him. Flashes of exhilarating freedom when I realized no one was monitoring my movements or dismissing my ideas. Depression hit me harder than I'd anticipated. There were days I could barely drag myself out of bed, when the future seemed like an endless gray tunnel with no light at the end. I lost weight, lost sleep, nearly lost my position in the program after showing up late. Twice in 1 week. The morning my training supervisor, Victoria, asked me to stay after the morning briefing, I was certain I was about to be cut from the program. Instead, she closed the door and leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "Something's going on with you, Sarah. Your work is excellent when you're focused, but you're scattered, distracted. I need to know if this program is really what you want." Her directness startled me into honesty. I found myself telling her everything. The relationship with Jason, the years of subtle undermining, the devastating final blow. When I finished, expecting sympathy or dismissal, she simply nodded. "I've been there," she said. "Not exactly the same situation, but close enough. Here's what I know. You can use this pain as an excuse to fail, or you can use it as fuel to succeed. The choice is entirely yours, but you need to make it today." Her words cut through the fog I'd been living in. That evening, I created a structured recovery plan for myself. Therapy once a week, a daily exercise routine, even if it was just a walk around the block, meal planning to ensure I was actually eating, and most importantly, a renewed commitment to the training program. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was my pathway back to myself. The intensive program became my salvation. I absorbed everything like a sponge: inventory management systems, employee scheduling algorithms, loss prevention techniques, visual merchandising principles. I volunteered for extra projects, came in early to shadow department managers, stayed late to help with inventory counts. When we rotated to the sales floor, I studied high-performing sales associates, noting how they built rapport with customers and overcame objections. In the stockroom, I reorganized the receiving process to reduce unpacking time by 20%. My first genuine victory came 3 months into the program when I implemented a new inventory tracking system that caught a significant discrepancy others had missed. Victoria called me into her office and slid a spreadsheet across her desk. "You just saved the company approximately $38,000, she said with a small smile. "Not bad for someone who's nothing without some finance, bro." I stared at the numbers, feeling something long dormant awakening inside me, pride in my own abilities, confidence in my judgment. That night, I didn't cry myself to sleep for the first time since the breakup. As the program progressed, I developed a reputation for innovative problem-solving and staff development. While other trainees focused exclusively on operations and metrics, I recognized that the human element was equally crucial. I created informal mentoring relationships with struggling employees, helping them identify and overcome personal barriers to performance. I listened to cashiers' suggestions for improving checkout efficiency and actually implemented their ideas, giving them credit in department meetings. One particularly memorable project involved working with a chronically underperforming department that other managers had written off as just lazy. After spending 2 weeks observing and interviewing team members, I identified the real issue: a scheduling system that ignored public transportation limitations, forcing employees to choose between arriving impossibly early or risking being late. My proposed solution, staggered shift starts aligned with bus schedules, increased on-time arrivals by 87%, and dramatically improved department morale. The culmination of the first phase of the program arrived with an unexpected opportunity. An assistant manager position opened up 6 months in, earlier than anyone in the cohort would typically be considered for promotion. Victoria encouraged me to apply despite my relative inexperience. "You see problems differently," she explained. "You look at systems and people together, not as separate entities. That's rare." The interview process was grueling. 5 rounds, with increasingly senior leaders, including a 4-hour practical assessment where I had to diagnose and address a simulated store crisis. When the regional manager called to offer me the position, I was standing in the self-checkout area, helping an elderly customer navigate the interface. I nearly dropped the phone. That evening, alone in my tiny apartment, I opened my laptop and navigated to Jason's LinkedIn profile, something I hadn't allowed myself to do since the breakup. He'd been promoted to department manager, his profile picture showing him in an expensive suit, wearing the confident smile I'd once found so attractive. 6 months ago, this would have triggered a spiral of self-doubt and comparison. Instead, I felt a curious detachment. Our paths had diverged, exactly as he'd predicted, but not in the way either of us had imagined. I closed the laptop and opened the management training manual instead, already planning improvements for my new department. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space was learning to command it instead, to shape it according to her own vision rather than someone else's expectations. The rebuilding had begun. My promotion to assistant manager coincided with another significant decision, joining a women's business networking group called Emerge that met monthly in a downtown conference center. The first meeting terrified me, a room full of confident professionals in tailored suits exchanging business cards and discussing market trends. I almost turned around at the door before a woman with a geometric haircut and striking red glasses spotted me hovering uncertainly. "First time?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Diane, CEO of a medical software startup, and still terrible at these things. Come sit with me and we can be awkward together." That simple act of kindness opened a door to a community I desperately needed. Unlike Jason's networking events, which had always felt like competitions disguised as conversations, these gatherings were genuinely supportive. Women at various career stages shared challenges and solutions without judgment or one-upmanship. For the first time since college, I found myself among peers who valued my perspective, rather than measuring it against their own achievements. Through Emerge, I met Amara, a marketing director who became both friend and informal mentor. When I confessed my educational insecurities, the nagging feeling that my undergrad degree wasn't enough in today's competitive landscape, she suggested looking into part-time MBA programs. "Not because you need the letters after your name," she clarified, "but because you're clearly hungry for the knowledge. The right program could give you frameworks for the intuitive business sense you already have." The idea took root. After researching options, I applied to a weekend MBA program at City University designed for working professionals. The acceptance letter arrived 3 weeks later, along with a partial scholarship based on my application essay about retail innovation. Balancing full-time management responsibilities with graduate studies demanded a level of discipline and organization I'd never before attempted. My life became a carefully calibrated system. Mornings at the store handling operations and staff management, evenings devoted to classes and study groups, weekends split between store coverage and intensive coursework. Sleep became precious, social life nearly non-existent. But for the first time in years, the exhaustion felt purposeful, each day building toward something that was entirely my own creation. 6 months into this new routine, fate threw an unexpected curveball. While attending a business function with my Emerge group, I literally collided with Jason at the bar, spilling his drink down the front of his designer suit. "I'm so sore." The apology died on my lips as recognition dawned. He looked the same, yet somehow diminished, as though my memory had amplified his presence. The shock on his face quickly transformed into something else. Curiosity tinged with reassessment as he took in my professional attire and the conference badge identifying me as a business school student. "Sarah," he said, recovering his composure with practiced ease. "You look different." "Being around the right people will do that," I replied, surprised by my own calm. Before he could respond, Amara appeared at my elbow handing me a fresh drink. "Sarah, the panel's about to start, and Morrison specifically asked if you'd be there for the Q&A. Apparently your question last quarter about integrated supply chains really got them thinking." She glanced at Jason with polite disinterest. "Friend? Of yours?" "Former acquaintance," I said, nodding briefly to Jason before walking away. Later, analyzing the encounter, I realized something profound had shifted. Seeing Jason hadn't triggered the emotional avalanche I'd feared. Instead, I felt a curious detachment, as though he were a character from a movie I'd seen long ago, rather than the man who had once defined my sense of self-worth. The management position continued to challenge and reward me in equal measure. When a regional merchandising crisis hit, a shipment of defective seasonal inventory with no replacement available before the critical holiday weekend, I transformed potential disaster into opportunity. Rather than hiding the inventory shortfall, I authorized my team to contact every customer with a reservation, explaining the situation and offering personalized alternative suggestions. We transformed the empty display space into a customer appreciation lounge with refreshments and special previews of upcoming collections. The initiative received recognition from corporate headquarters and was implemented in 3 other locations facing similar challenges. My store began climbing the regional rankings, moving from 17th to 4th in overall performance within 8 months. Employee retention improved dramatically as my management philosophy, treating staff as valuable contributors rather than replaceable parts, translated into concrete policy changes. Improved scheduling practices, transparent communication about business challenges, and a formalized pathway for advancement. My promotion to store manager arrived ahead of schedule, accompanied by a handwritten note from the regional director. "Leaders who build both profits and people are rare. Keep breaking the mold." The day I accepted the promotion also marked another milestone, completing my first year of the MBA program with a 3.9 GPA. To celebrate both achievements, I moved from my tiny studio to a modest but comfortable 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood adjacent to downtown, still within my carefully budgeted means but representing tangible progress. As I arranged my books on newly purchased shelves and placed my framed acceptance letter on the wall, I realized something significant. I was no longer rebuilding from the wreckage Jason had left. I was building something entirely new that had never existed before. My management style continued evolving, informed by both academic theories from my MBA studies and practical experience on the sales floor. I developed an innovative employee training program that replaced traditional top-down instruction with collaborative learning circles where veteran staff mentored newcomers, while newcomers contributed fresh perspectives on customer experiences. The program reduced training costs by 30%, while improving new employee retention by 45%. When corporate leadership took notice and requested documentation to potentially implement the program company-wide, I experienced another first, seeing my name on a formal business proposal distributed to executives across the organization. The crowning achievement of this rebuilding phase came at my MBA graduation ceremony. Seated among my classmates in our caps and gowns, waiting for our names to be called, I felt a profound sense of completion. This degree hadn't been about proving anything to anyone else. Not to Jason, not to my colleagues, not even to my younger self. It represented something purer, the joy of learning, the satisfaction of meeting a challenge on my own terms, the pleasure of expanding my understanding of the business world I'd always wanted to navigate successfully. As the dean read my name, Sarah Mitchell with honors, and I crossed the stage to accept my diploma, I caught sight of Victoria and Amara in the audience, cheering wildly. The woman who had once been told she was nothing without someone else's support had transformed into someone who could not only stand on her own, but help others find their footing as well. The reconstruction was complete. I was not just rebuilt. I was renovated, upgraded, transformed into something stronger and more authentic than I had ever been before. The success of my employee training program reverberated beyond my individual store. Corporate headquarters requested detailed implementation guides, and within 6 months, the program had been adapted for 20 locations across 3 states. My name began appearing in company-wide communications, sometimes with the prefix innovative or forward-thinking. adjectives I would have dismissed as applying to someone else not long ago. I settled into a rhythm of continuous improvement, both for my store and myself. Each quarter brought new challenges, shifting consumer trends, supply chain disruptions, evolving competitive landscapes. I approached each one methodically, applying frameworks from my MBA studies while trusting the intuitive understanding of retail dynamics I developed through direct experience. My professional network expanded naturally as I connected with other store managers, regional directors, and occasionally corporate leaders during quarterly business reviews. Unlike the forced networking I'd observed in Jason's world, these relationships developed organically around shared challenges and mutual respect. I no longer measured my professional worth by the titles of people in my contact list, but by the quality of our exchanges. The call that would ultimately change everything came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing department performance metrics with my assistant managers. "Sarah Mitchell, this is Eleanor Vasquez with Pinnacle Recruiting. Do you have a moment to discuss a confidential opportunity?" I stepped into my office, expecting another retail management position, perhaps with a competitor offering marginally better compensation. What followed instead was a description of a corporate role that seemed custom designed for my unusual combination of skills: formal business education, hands-on management experience, proven innovation in employee development, and demonstrated ability to transform underperforming operations. The position is regional director for a major technology firm looking to overhaul their branch office operations, Eleanor explained. They're specifically seeking someone from outside their industry who can bring fresh perspectives on management practices and operational efficiency. When she named the compensation package, nearly triple my current salary, I assumed I'd misheard. When she clarified that I hadn't, my next question stumbled out before I could frame it professionally. "Why me? I'm sure there are candidates with more corporate experience." Eleanor's response was refreshingly direct. "The CEO read an article about your training program in Retail Business Monthly and was impressed by your systematic approach to a people problem. They've tried promoting from within twice for this position, and both candidates failed to implement necessary cultural changes. They want an outsider who isn't married to how things have always been done." Only after we'd scheduled a preliminary interview did I think to ask which technology firm. Eleanor's answer sent a jolt of electricity through my body. Axion Technologies, their headquarters downtown. Jason's company, the company where he'd been building his empire while mocking my retail career. The company where, according to my LinkedIn research during darker moments, he'd recently been passed over for promotion to the exact position I was now being recruited for. My immediate instinct was to decline the interview. Why, voluntarily, enter a space so contaminated by painful history? Why risk facing Jason regularly after I'd finally built a life completely separate from him? I called Amara that evening, seeking perspective from someone who knew my history but wouldn't be swayed by its emotional weight. "The question isn't whether you'll have to deal with awkwardness around your ex," she said, after listening patiently. "The question is whether this role aligns with your capabilities and career goals. Don't give him the power to make this decision for you, either by avoiding the opportunity or by taking it to prove something." Her clarity cut through my confusion. I spent the weekend researching Axion Technologies, their market position, leadership structure, corporate culture, and most importantly, the challenges facing their regional operations. News articles and industry analyses painted a concerning picture. Rapid expansion had created disconnected branch offices with inconsistent practices, high employee turnover, and declining client satisfaction. The very problems I'd spent years learning to solve, first at ValueMart and then through my MBA studies. The interview process was unlike anything I'd experienced in retail. 6 rounds over 3 weeks, including panel interviews with executives, case studies requiring detailed strategic recommendations, and a final presentation to the leadership team about my vision for transforming regional operations. I approached each round with methodical preparation and authentic responses, neither hiding my retail background nor apologizing for it. Instead, I positioned it as my unique advantage: experience managing complex operations with tight margins, motivating, staff in high-pressure environments, and creating systems that balanced corporate priorities with human needs. After my final presentation, the CEO, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for brutal directness, asked the question I'd been preparing for since the first interview. "Your background is unusual for this position. Why should we take a chance on you instead of someone from within our industry?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because I see what others can't. In retail, I learned to identify systemic problems by watching how people interact with processes. Your branches are struggling because your phenomenal technological innovation hasn't been matched by equivalent innovation in how you manage people. I've built my career on bridging that gap." 2 days later, Eleanor called with the offer, Regional Director of Branch Operations, overseeing 7 locations, including headquarters. The compensation package included not just the substantial salary, but also stock options, performance bonuses, and relocation assistance to a downtown apartment within walking distance of Axion's offices. As I reviewed the offer letter, a map of reporting relationships caught my attention. A detailed organizational chart showing who would report directly to me in the new role. There, under department managers, was a name that once held such power over my self-perception: Jason Rodriguez. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor sometimes. The decision before me wasn't simple. Accepting meant stepping into a much more visible, high-stakes role than anything I'd previously experienced. It meant potentially facing daily reminders of painful history. It meant leaving the retail environment I'd mastered for the unfamiliar territory of corporate technology, but it also meant a chance to apply everything I'd learned about organizational transformation on a much larger scale. It meant financial security beyond what I'd ever imagined possible. And yes, it meant definitively closing the chapter Jason had tried to write for me years ago. I called Eleanor the next morning, my decision made. "I'd like to accept the position," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "When would they like me to start?" My first day at Axion Technologies began with a surreal elevator ride to the executive floor, the same building I'd stared up at 4 years earlier while clutching my cashier's uniform. The executive assistant who greeted me, Margot, ATTO, poised woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of the company's structure, provided a comprehensive orientation package and a detailed schedule for my first week. "The CEO wanted me to ensure you have everything you need to hit the ground running," she explained, handing me a security badge with my name and title embossed beneath the company logo. "She rarely takes such a personal interest in new directors, but your onboarding plan has her fingerprints all over it." I spent that first day in a whirlwind of introductions and briefings, carefully constructing a mental map of power dynamics and interdependencies that would inform my approach to the transformation ahead. The problems were exactly as I diagnosed. During my interview research, siloed departments, inconsistent management practices across branches, a culture that prioritized technical brilliance over emotional intelligence in leadership selections. Most concerning was the employee turnover data. Exit interviews revealed a pattern of talented staff leaving because they felt undervalued and micromanaged by technically proficient but interpersonally challenged managers. By day 3, I'd identified the branch offices most in need of immediate intervention, creating a prioritized schedule for site visits and targeted improvements. Conspicuously absent from my orientation meetings was any direct interaction with the department managers who would be reporting to me. A deliberate strategy on my part to ensure I understood the organizational context before individual personalities could color my perception. The executive team meeting on day 5 would change that. Seated at the gleaming conference table, I presented my preliminary assessment and phased approach for regional transformation. The CEO nodded approvingly as I outlined specific metrics for measuring progress and expected timelines for implementation. "I'd like to begin with a comprehensive review of the downtown branch operations," I concluded, as patterns established at headquarters often cascade to regional offices, both positive and negative. "Excellent approach," the CEO agreed. "I've scheduled you for introductory meetings with all department managers tomorrow, followed by a full branch visit next week. Any questions before we proceed?" None came, but I could feel curiosity and speculation rippling through the room. A new executive from outside the industry, given significant authority to implement changes, I represented both threat and opportunity to those gathered around the table. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare for the scheduled meetings with department managers. Margot had arranged them at 30-minute intervals throughout the day, with brief breaks for reflection between each one. I've ordered them by department size, she explained, starting with smaller teams and working up to the larger operational units. This meant Jason would be among the last managers I'd meet. His department of 28 staff members made it one of the larger units under my purview. Each meeting followed a similar pattern. The manager arrived with performance data and staffing information. We discussed departmental challenges and priorities, and I outlined my general philosophy, while asking targeted questions about team dynamics. Most managers appeared cautiously optimistic about the potential for positive change, though a few seemed resistant to any suggestion that their approaches might need adjustment. At 3 o'clock, Margot knocked and opened my office door. "Mr. Rodriguez for your 3:15, she announced with professional neutrality. And there he was, the man who had once defined my sense of possibility and limitation, standing in my doorway with a leather portfolio and a confident smile that froze mid-formation as recognition dawned. The shock that flashed across Jason's face was quickly masked by practiced composure, but not before I glimpsed something that looked remarkably like fear. "Sarah," he said, recovering with visible effort. "This is unexpected. Please come." "In, Mr. Rodriguez," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "I believe we have 30 minutes scheduled to discuss your department's operations." Jason settled into the chair, his body language a study in forced casualness. "I had no idea you were the new regional director everyone's been talking about. Quite a career change from retail." The slight emphasis on retail carried echoes of his old condescension. "Not as dramatic a change as you might think," I responded evenly. "Operational excellence and people management translate across industries. But we're here to discuss your department, not my background. I've reviewed your quarterly performance metrics and have some questions about the customer satisfaction decline in the last 2 reporting periods. For the remainder of our meeting, I maintained strict professional focus, asking pointed questions about workflow inefficiencies and team structure while taking detailed notes. Jason alternated between defensive explanations and attempts to establish familiarity, dropping references to shared acquaintances and mutual connections as though we were old friends catching up rather than manager and direct report in a formal business context. When our allotted time ended, I stood to signal the conclusion of our meeting. "Thank you for the overview, Mr. Rodriguez. I'll be visiting your department next Tuesday for more direct observation. Please ensure your team is prepared for process, reviews, and individual consultations." As he rose to leave, Jason attempted one final bid for established connection. "This is a little weird, isn't it? Given our history, maybe we should grab coffee sometime, clear the air outside of work." I met his gaze directly. "Our personal history has no bearing on our professional relationship, Mr. Rodriguez. I'll evaluate your department's performance and your leadership capabilities by the same standards I apply to every manager under my supervision. Nothing more, nothing less." The power shift was palpable, a reversal so complete it seemed to leave him momentarily disoriented. As he left my office, I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds to acknowledge the symmetry of the situation before, returning my focus to the substantial work ahead. The department visit the following week revealed exactly what I'd suspected from the performance data. Jason's management style created a technically proficient but emotionally disengaged team. Staff members performed required tasks adequately, but showed little initiative or investment in outcomes beyond their immediate responsibilities. During individual consultations, several team members cautiously expressed frustration with communication barriers and limited growth opportunities. Most tellingly, when asked about departmental strengths, almost everyone mentioned technical capabilities while struggling to identify collaborative advantages or innovation potential. Jason himself shadowed me throughout the visit, alternating between excessive explanation of processes and subtle attempts to undermine my questions. When I inquired about cross-functional collaboration with other departments, he interjected before staff could fully respond. we found most interdepartmental initiatives create more complexity than value. Better to excel at our core functions than dilute our focus. The subtle challenge to my authority didn't go unnoticed by his team, who watched our interaction with careful attention. That evening, I documented comprehensive observations and began drafting initial recommendations for departmental restructuring. Jason's attempts to undermine my authority continued in more public forums. During the first all-managers meeting I led, he questioned the time frame for proposed changes. With all due respect to our new director's retail experience, technology operations have different complexity factors that might make this implementation schedule unrealistic. The implicit message was clear. You don't belong in this world. You don't understand our business. Rather than engaging directly with the subtle attack, I turned it into an opportunity. An excellent point about industry-specific considerations. This is precisely why the implementation plan includes a 2-week assessment period for each department to identify unique adaptation needs. Mr. Rodriguez, I'd like you to lead a working group of department managers to develop these adaptation frameworks. Your concern for proper execution will be valuable in ensuring we address all technical nuances. The assignment simultaneously acknowledged his expertise while placing him in a collaborative role that would require him to support rather than obstruct the initiative. His expression, momentary surprise followed by grudging recalculation, confirmed he recognized the maneuver for what it was. My first major policy implementation directly impacted Jason's department. After analyzing operations across all branches, I identified a critical inefficiency in how client requests were processed, a fragmented approach that created redundancies and communication gaps. The solution required breaking down departmental silos and creating cross-functional teams organized around client sectors rather than technical functions. For most departments, this meant minor adjustments to workflow and reporting structures. For Jason's department, it meant a fundamental reorganization that would distribute his team members across multiple client-centered units, effectively reducing both his authority and his headcount. When I announced the reorganization during the quarterly planning meeting, Jason requested an immediate preview. 6 months into my role as regional director, the transformation of Axion's branch operations had exceeded even the CEO's optimistic projections. Employee retention improved by 23%, client satisfaction scores increased across all metrics, and cross-functional collaboration had become the new normal rather than the exception it once was. The cultural shift was equally significant. Managers who had initially resisted changes had either adapted to the new approach or found positions elsewhere, creating space for promotions based on both technical expertise and leadership capability, rather than seniority or political connections. My regular reviews with the executive team had evolved from scrutiny of my unconventional methods to discussions of how to extend successful innovations to other divisions. I had earned not just acceptance, but genuine respect, evidenced by increased decision-making authority and inclusion in strategic planning beyond my immediate scope of responsibility. Jason's department had undergone its own evolution. After his initial proposal for modified implementation, he had surprised me by embracing aspects of the new organizational philosophy with unexpected thoroughness. The client-centered team structure he initially resisted had ultimately created new visibility for his technical innovations, resulting in recognition he might not have received in the previous siloed environment. During our most recent quarterly review, I noted improvements in both performance metrics and staff engagement surveys from his team. "You've made significant progress," I acknowledged, reviewing the data displayed on my tablet, particularly in cross-departmental collaboration and client communication clarity. Jason nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "I've been applying some principles from that management book you recommended to the executive team. The one about adaptive leadership in technological environments. There were more relevant insights than I initially expected." The acknowledgement represented significant growth from the man who had once dismissed my business perspective entirely. It wasn't friendship or even particularly warm collegiality, but it was a functional professional relationship built on mutual recognition of capability, something I would have considered impossible during the darkest days after our breakup. As I drove home that evening to my downtown apartment, a space I had furnished deliberately to reflect my aesthetic rather than accommodate someone else's preferences, I reflected on the remarkable journey from grocery store cashier to corporate executive. The path had been neither direct nor easy, with detours and obstacles I couldn't have anticipated when I walked out of Jason's apartment 4 years earlier, but each challenge, each moment of doubt, each small victory had contributed to building not just a career, but a self-concept grounded in genuine capability rather than external validation. The pain that once felt unbearable had become the foundation for my greatest growth. Not because suffering itself was valuable, but because it forced me to question limitations I had unconsciously accepted. Jason's dismissal of my potential hadn't crushed me as he might have intended. Instead, it had ultimately freed me to pursue success defined by my own standards rather than his narrow vision. The most profound lesson wasn't about career advancement or financial security. Though both were welcome developments, it was about the nature of self-worth and its relationship to external circumstances. When Jason told me I was nothing without him, he had inadvertently challenged me to discover who I might become on my own terms. The answer had surprised us both. I was capable of more than either of us had imagined, not because I needed to prove him wrong, but because removing his limiting influence allowed me to recognize possibilities I had always possessed, but never fully acknowledged. This understanding transformed how I approached my leadership responsibilities. When interviewing candidates for positions within my division, I looked beyond conventional qualifications to identify potential that might flourish with proper support and opportunity. I established a formal mentoring program pairing senior leaders with promising employees from historically overlooked backgrounds. Most significantly, I implemented a talent development initiative specifically designed to help administrative and support staff transition into management roles, creating pathways similar to the one that had ultimately led to my own success. One particular hire exemplified this philosophy. Melissa, a receptionist with an associate's degree who demonstrated exceptional organizational instincts and problem-solving abilities. Rather than keeping her in an administrative role, I created a project coordinator position that leveraged her natural talents while providing structured development opportunities. Within 8 months, she was managing complex cross-departmental initiatives with remarkable effectiveness. Her success validated my conviction that talent existed at all levels of an organization, often unrecognized because it didn't conform to traditional expectations. My approach to mentoring was similarly informed by personal experience. Rather than positioning myself as having all the answers, I emphasized collaborative problem-solving and mutual learning. Leadership isn't about knowing everything, I explained to a management trainee struggling with imposter syndrome. It's about creating environments where people can contribute their best work and grow through challenges. The most valuable thing I can offer isn't perfect direction, but thoughtful questions that help you discover your own solutions. This philosophy extended to my interactions with Jason as well. During a particularly challenging client situation that required coordination between multiple departments, including his, I resisted the temptation to micromanage or impose solutions based on authority alone. Instead, I facilitated a problem-solving session that allowed all voices to contribute, including his. The approach not only produced a more effective resolution, but demonstrated in practice the leadership model I advocated, one based on collaborative strength rather than hierarchical control. Our final significant interaction occurred during preparation for the annual leadership conference. The CEO had requested I present our divisional transformation as a case study for other regions, and part of my presentation included video interviews with department managers discussing their experiences with the change process. When Jason's interview concluded with an unexpectedly insightful analysis of how resistance to change often masks fear of inadequacy rather than genuine disagreement with proposed directions, I found myself nodding in appreciation of his self-awareness. After the recording finished, he lingered in my office doorway. "Can I ask you something off the record?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, curious about his uncharacteristic hesitancy. "My sister's daughter just graduated with a business degree, but she's struggling to find a position in this economy," he began. "She's smart, hardworking, but lacks connections or experience that would give her an edge. Any advice I could pass along? You've obviously navigated that particular challenge successfully." The request contained no trace of the condescension that had once colored our interactions, just a genuine request for perspective that might help someone facing obstacles similar to those I had encountered. I considered my response carefully. Tell her that her first position doesn't define her career trajectory. Sometimes the most valuable experience comes from unexpected places. Retail, customer service, administration, roles that provide insights into how businesses actually function beyond theoretical frameworks. The important thing is to approach every position as an opportunity to demonstrate capability and build transferable skills, not just fulfill minimum requirements. Jason nodded thoughtfully. "I'll share that with her, and maybe mention the mentoring program you've established here, in case she's interested in applying for one of the entry-level positions next quarter. I'd be happy to review her resume if she decides to apply," I offered, surprising myself with the sincerity of the gesture. As he thanked me and turned to leave, I realized we had finally achieved something I wouldn't have thought possible years ago, a moment of genuine human connection untainted by our complicated history. The interaction crystallized how completely I had healed from the wounds of our relationship. I no longer defined myself in opposition to his assessment or needed to prove my worth through comparison. The freedom that came from breaking free of that toxic dynamic had allowed me to become not just successful by external measures, but internally whole in a way that transcended professional accomplishments. Looking toward the future, I had begun exploring possibilities for further growth. Perhaps eventually a move to Chief Operations Officer, or even CEO of a mid-sized company where I could implement organizational philosophies on an even broader scale. But I no longer approached such possibilities with desperate urgency or tied my self-worth to achieving specific titles by arbitrary deadlines. Success had become a journey of continuous development rather than a destination to be reached at any cost. The most profound realization was how completely Jason's words had been reversed by reality. Far from being nothing without him, I had discovered my greatest strengths precisely when I walked away from his diminishing influence. The person who had once been my greatest detractor had unintentionally become the catalyst for my most significant growth. There was a certain poetic justice in that outcome, though not the vindictive kind I might once have imagined. True vindication wasn't about proving him wrong, but about discovering I had always been right about my own potential. As I settled into my apartment that evening, I realized the journey had come full circle in the most meaningful way. The woman who had once sobbed in her car, wondering if she was truly nothing without a particular relationship, now understood with bone-deep certainty that we are never nothing. We are always exactly ourselves, with limitless potential waiting to be recognized and developed. Sometimes the people who wound us most deeply ultimately push us toward our greatest strengths, not because they intend to help us grow, but because overcoming their diminishment requires us to discover capacities we might otherwise never have, fully claimed as our own. Have you ever had someone underestimate your potential, only to find their doubt became your greatest motivation? Or perhaps you've had to rebuild yourself after a relationship that diminished rather than enhanced your sense of worth. I'd love to hear your stories of transformation and resilience in the comments below. Sometimes the most painful chapters of our lives become the foundation for our greatest growth, not because suffering itself is valuable, but because overcoming challenges reveals strengths we never knew we possessed. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more reflections on personal growth and professional development. Thank you for joining me on this journey of rediscovery and transformation. Remember, you are never nothing. You are always exactly yourself with limitless potential waiting to be recognized and developed.